Okay, I see that it's 11 o'clock where you are, and it's 6 o'clock where I am, and Rabbi Kelman likes these sessions to start on time, so we are going to start on time. This is session number 9 of 10 sessions about Parshanut and Polemics, and I think that this session will be pretty different from things that we have been seeing beforehand, and I'll instead of telling you how it's going to be different, I will just demonstrate with the text. I'm sorry, I did not have this. Okay, can everyone see the text now or not?
We cannot.
You cannot see the text. Okay.
No.
Thank you for telling me that. Okay, and now you can, I assume?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. I'll get this technology down eventually. A couple of weeks ago, when we were talking about the beginning of the book of Bereshit, we saw some commentaries on the fact that the plural is used, that God says, Na'aseh Adam, let us make man. And already back in Talmudic times, we found that some opponents of traditional Judaism, not clear who those opponents were. They could have been early Christians, not necessarily, were commenting on Na'aseh Adam, and we saw a number of approaches. And one of the approaches that we saw was the approach of Rabbi Yosef Bechor Shor. Rabbi Yosef Bechor Shor will be at the center of our session today. He won't be the only commentator we will be looking at. Rabbi Yosef Bechor Shor was one of the Ba'alei Tosfot. He appears in the Tosfot under the name of Rav Yosef Me'or Leon, and we don't know a lot about him. He lived in the second half of the 12th century. Some people think that he might have been a student of Rashbam's or a student of Rashbam's. He has some caustic comments about Rashbam a couple of times, so I'm not sure whether he's actually a student of Rashbam, but he also did accept many of Rashbam's interpretations of biblical texts. We read this text before. I'll read it again now just to review. I'll read it in English. If a Christian says to you, it is because of the 3 persons of the Trinity that the plural is used, one should respond to their foolishness by blunting their teeth with the following refutation: Afata hakeh et shinav, using language of the Haggadah, the evil son of the Haggadah. You turn to the Christian and you say, don't you claim that the 3 of them, the 3 persons of the Trinity, are equal and of one mind, and all of them share in one power? Why is it necessary then for one part to say to the other part, let us make man, as if to inform or invite the other? The text, according to their understanding, the Christian understanding, should read, and they said, let us make man, which would imply that each of them said it together with one thought. Their words prove to be vain and empty. Okay, so there are 2 things to point out about this text here of Rabbi Yosef Bechor Shor. First of all, he's displaying some real knowledge of Christian dogma, something that we did not see really in Rashi's comments, when we saw comments of Rashi about the Christians. So he knew that the Christians were connecting various verses, seeing various verses as prophecies of Jesus, and he was arguing against that, and saying maybe we shouldn't explain these verses as being about the Messiah. And the same thing with Rashbam. We didn't see any examples there of displaying any deep knowledge about Christianity. Rav Yosef Bechor Shor seems to have more knowledge about Christianity. He understands that the theory of the Trinity is that there are three persons of the Trinity and they are all equal to each other. And it is not that one of the persons of the Trinity is in charge of the other persons of the Trinity, but the official dogma of the church says that they are all equal and they are all of one mind. They don't disagree with each other. So he's saying, if you Christians want to say that this is one person of the Trinity, let's say God the Father, I don't know which person of the Trinity it would be, is turning to the other two persons of the Trinity and saying, come on, let us make man, that's inappropriate for a Christian understanding of the text. So that's the first thing to note, is that Rav Yosef Bechor Shor's approach to polemics is different than the people that we have seen beforehand. Looking at it in chronological order, Rashi and then Rashbam and then Bechor Shor, Rashi and Rashbam did not display that kind of knowledge about Christian dogma. But the other difference between what Rav Yosef Bechor Shor is doing here and what Rashi and Rashbam did, and we saw in previous weeks, is the force of the language that he uses. Lepetiutam yesh lahashiv. We should respond to their foolishness. And then at the end of the text, their words proved to be vain and empty. Nimtzeu divrehem hevel varik. That's really strong language. Now, Rashbam and Rashi never used language like that. It is arguable that Rashi and Rashbam felt the same way, that they were dealing with a foolish approach, a vain and empty approach, but they never say it. And Rav Yosef Bechor says it. And it is a phenomenon that's occurring at the end of the 12th century, is that not only are Jewish Bible commentaries confronting Christianity and attempting to defend Judaism against the Christological and Christian interpretations of biblical texts, but beyond that, Rav Yosef Bechor Shor is on the attack. He's saying the interpretations that you are offering don't make sense from the point of view of your own dogma, and he's on the attack with offensive language here about what the Christians are saying. And this is not the only example that we're going to be seeing. We're going to see a number of examples of this in Rav Yosef Bechor Shor's Bible commentary. I'm sure most of you know Rav Yosef Bechor Shor's Bible commentary is not standardly part of the Mikraot Gedolot, the standard compendium of medieval commentaries on the text, but in the a new edition that has come out of the Mikraot Gedolot called the Haketer edition, published here in Israel, you can find Rav Yosef Bechor Shor's commentary. There's been a small growth of interest in his commentary on the Torah in recent years. Rav Yosef Bechor Shor also shows another text of his that shows his understanding of the Trinity and his understanding of Trinitarian interpretations of biblical texts. The story of the three men who showed up visiting Abraham in Genesis chapter 18, and then two of them went on to Sodom. On this, Bechor Shor writes that the Malachim, it says, came to Sodom, and he says that actually Malachim doesn't mean angels, it means messengers of God, as in Jacob sent Malachim. That doesn't mean angels. Jacob did not send angels, according to Rav Yosef Bechor Shor and most of the Pshat commentators. He says that Malachim simply means a messenger. And actually, the Greek word angelos, from which angel comes, our English word angel comes, it can also just mean a messenger. It doesn't necessarily mean a divine being. And Bechor Shor goes on. And from this verse, there is a response to the Minim who say that these three men of Genesis are the three parts of the Trinity. One may respond, when they arrived in Sodom, where was the third part? Why did the Trinity split up? If the three who showed up to Abraham were the three parts of the Trinity, but the three parts of the Trinity are inseparable. So why in the next chapter does it say that only two of them went to Sodom, to where Lot was living? That's his first problem. For only two of the parts were there in Sodom, as it is written, and the two angels arrived. Furthermore, it is written, and the Lord sent us to destroy. The two who showed up there in Sodom said, Vayishalachenu Hashem l'shachata, the Lord sent us to destroy. And you may respond, which part of the Trinity did the sending? Are they not all equal? That there's obviously there's a hierarchy here. The people here who are doing the work in chapter 19, whether you call them angels or messengers, they are receiving their orders from somebody else. He says this does not conform to Christian theology. So here again, Bechor Shor is showing his knowledge of Christian theology and criticizing Christians for offering interpretations of verses in the Torah that are playing fast and loose with Christian theology. You know, as opposed to what Rashi and Rashbam were doing, and though we saw in previous weeks, where Rashi and Rashbam were saying, okay, how are we going to interpret this text in such a way that it is not, it doesn't offer the Christological interpretation. Bechor Shor is looking at the Christological interpretation and saying that it doesn't make sense from an internal Christian point of view. Bechor Shor also discusses the issue of the virgin birth, which, to the best of my knowledge, neither Rashi nor Rashbam ever deals with the issue of the virgin birth, and he does it in the context of a text where Abraham tells his servant, who he's sending off to Haran to find a wife for Isaac, he tells him to swear, and he tells him to swear by putting his hand under Abraham's thigh. Maybe just before we look at what Bechor Shor said about that, you see at the bottom left-hand corner of the slide, Jerome, writing in the 4th century, writes, Abraham also makes his servant swear upon his thigh, that is on Christ, who was to spring from his seed. That's why Abraham's servant put his hand on under Abraham's thigh. It was a hint that there is some offspring of Abraham that is going to be coming along, and this offspring is going to be Jesus, going to be the Messiah, going to be the Son of God, and that's why he was swearing. The earliest source that I found that gives this interpretation is Jerome. Maybe some Christians said it before the 4th century, but Christians continued to say it over the centuries. And then Bechor Shor offers a rather strident criticism of this. He says, the Minim say that the oath was made in that way in order to recall that Jesus, their false god, Tarputam, that's a favorite word of his. Tarputam comes from a rabbinic Hebrew word that means to go rotten or something, something of that nature, and that's the word that Bechor Shor likes to use about Christian beliefs in order to recall that Jesus, their false god, was born from there. One should answer them that according to them, he wasn't conceived through any man, that Jesus didn't have a human father. So logically, the servant should have sworn by putting his hand on the genitals of a woman instead of putting his hands on the genital of a man. Now, the question that we have to think about when we read attacking kind of comments like this is, would Behor Shor have actually said things like this if he was talking to a Christian, if he was polemicizing against a Christian? We suggested in earlier weeks that Rashi and Rashbam were dealing with Christianity in their commentaries on the Bible as a form of a primer to help Jews who would find themselves in arguments with Christians. Could you really imagine a Jew who was in an argument with a Christian at the end of the 12th century in France saying something like this to a Christian if they were discussing the meaning of this text? I'm just posing that question right now, and we'll get back to it later. You could just say, well, of course, this text is being written in medieval Hebrew. It was very rare to find in 12th century France a Christian who was able to read biblical Hebrew. There was not a high level of knowledge of biblical Hebrew, and rabbinic Hebrew was hardly known. So it's possible that Jews just felt that they could write whatever they want in their commentaries, and that nobody from the other side is actually going to be reading it. Okay, so here again, Behor Shor is showing his deep level of knowledge of Christian interpretation and understanding of the doctrine of the virgin birth in this commentary. He demonstrates this again in his commentary on the verse in Deuteronomy. The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet from among your own people, like myself. Him you shall heed. That's Moshe is speaking and saying, there will be other prophets like me who will come along, and you should listen to the prophets that come along after me. Here's just, before we see what Behor Shor says, we see, going back, Cyprian writing in his book, an early church leader writing in the 3rd century, writing in his testimonies against the Jews. Here are the proofs of the truth of Christianity and the falseness of Judaism that Cyprian is claiming. Another prophet such as Moses was promised, to wit, one who should give a new testament and who rather ought to be heard. In Deuteronomy, God said to Moses, the Lord said to me, a prophet will I raise up to them from among their brethren, such as you, and I will give my words in his mouth, and he shall speak unto them that which I shall command him, and whosoever shall not hear whatsoever things that prophet shall speak in my name, I will avenge it. Concerning whom also Christ says in the gospel, according to John, search the scriptures in which you think you have eternal life. These are they which set forth testimony concerning me, and you will not come to me that you might have life. Do not think that I accuse you to the Father. There is one that accuses you, Moses, on whom you hope. For if you would believe Moses, who said that I am going to be coming along, that's John is quoting Jesus as saying, if you would believe Moses when he wrote, I am going to raise up a prophet for you, you would also believe me, for he wrote of me. But if you believe not Moses' writings, how shall you believe my words? So this became a Christian proof text that when the verse here says, the Lord God will raise up for you a prophet from among your own people, like myself, him yet shall you heed. This is Moses prophesying that Jesus will be coming along. Behor Shor, I would say, in his comment here, shows that he knows that this is a Christian proof text, and he goes on the offensive. Instead of just saying, well, that's not a good interpretation of the text for the following reasons, he says that really, if you look at what it says here in this text, from among your own people, like myself, mikirbecha, meachecha kamoni, what does that mean? Miyuchas. A person who has yichus. Me'av ve'em, a person who has a father and a mother. Velo she'imo mishatakto mipnei sheba derech zima. And not someone whose mother is silent about who the father was, since he was produced through illicit sexuality. Bechor Shor here is hinting rather directly towards the common Jewish belief about Jesus, that Jesus was not born through a virgin birth, that he was born through an illicit. It's true he didn't have a father, an acknowledged father, and there were many Jewish texts like this about Jesus, and Bechor Shor puts this into his Bible commentary. This argument that this verse could not be prophesying about Jesus. And in fact, this verse is saying that somebody like Jesus is disqualified from being a prophet because he doesn't have yichus, because he's the product of illicit sexuality. This kind of Jewish understanding of where Jesus came from is found mostly most famously, let's say, in a work called Toldot Yeshu, the genealogy, the chronology of Jesus. This is a book that we do not know how old it is. Some people claim that it may go back as old as early as the 2nd or 3rd century. Definitely by the 8th or 9th century, Toldot Yeshu existed, and it existed in medieval times in many different versions. On the web, I found one version of Toldot Yeshu that's been translated into English. This is not the most famous version of Toldot Yeshu, but for those of you who don't know it, just read through what it says here. In the beginning of this version of Toldot Yeshu, in the year 3671, which is 89 BCE, we talked already about the problem that there are a number of Jewish texts that place Jesus around 100 years before the Common Era. Not going to go into that issue again. In the year 3671, 89 BCE, in the days of King Yanai, a great misfortune befell Israel when there arose a certain disreputable man of the tribe of Judah whose name was Yosef Pandera. He lived in Bethlehem in Judah. Near his house dwelt a widow and her lovely and chaste daughter named Miriam. Miriam was betrothed to Yochanan of the royal house of David, a man learned in the Torah and God-fearing. At the close of a certain Shabbat, Joseph Pandera, attractive and like a warrior in appearance, having gazed lustfully upon Miriam, knocked upon the door of her room and betrayed her by pretending that he was her betrothed husband, Yochanan. So as we all know, the lighting was not all that great at night in the ancient world. Yosef Pandera comes knocking on the door there and says, "I'm your fiance, Yochanan, coming to visit," and she opens up the door. Even so, she was amazed at this improper conduct and submitted only against her will. She did not sleep with him willingly, but if it was her fiance coming, then she said, okay, she let him in. And thereafter, when Yochanan came to her, but later on, some time later, when Yochanan came to visit his fiance, Miriam expressed astonishment at behavior so foreign to his character. "Why did you do that to me the last time that you came to visit me? It was thus that they both came to know the crime of Yosef Pandera and the terrible mistake on the part of Miriam. Whereupon Yochanan went to Rabbi Shimon ben Shetach and related to him the tragic seduction. Lacking witnesses required for the punishment of Yosef Pandera, and Miriam being with child, Yochanan left for Babylonia. And so this Miriam is left with a child. She's pregnant. Her fiance is no longer there, and she's going to. And the book goes on to tell the story of this child who is called Yeshu or Yeshua in the continuation here. And so that this was one version of Toldot Yeshu has Jesus being born of this illicit union between a Jewish neighbor and Miriam. And in another version of Toldot Yeshu, it's a Roman soldier who gets Miriam pregnant. It's interesting that in all of the versions of Toldot Yeshu that I've seen, Miriam always comes out okay. You know, she's a good person, and maybe she made a mistake here. She didn't realize that this man who was coming was not her fiance, but she is described as a good person. And the story goes on. You can find it. Those of you who don't know about Toldot Yeshu and would like to know about Toldot Yeshu, you can find at least one version of it in English and at least one version of it in Hebrew on the web. It's a book like this, of course, had no author's name attached to it, and it was often considered dangerous for Jews to have a copy of this around. You can see Christian texts saying, medieval Christian texts saying that the Jews insult Jesus, and I'm sorry to say, it's true. The Jews did have books that were insulting Jesus, like Toldot Yeshu. But what's happening here is that some of these insults are getting into Bible commentaries here. Joseph Bechor is putting these themes from Toldot Yeshu into his Bible commentary and referring to Jesus, alluding to Jesus here as being someone she'imo meshatakto mipnei shabbat derech zima. Mother was silent about who the father was since he was produced through illicit sexuality. Moving on to another topic that shows up in Bechor Shor's commentary on the Torah, the issue of icons. Jews and Christians in medieval times often talked about the question about whether it is legitimate to have icons. And of course, the Christians who Rashi and Rashbam and Bechor Shor all knew in France, they had many icons in their churches, and Jews did not have icons in their synagogues. And Bechor Shor interprets the second commandment of the 10 Commandments. Lo ta'aseh lecha pesel b'chol tmuna. Do not make any sculptured image or any likeness. Here's what he says in his commentary. Should you say, I will not worship any other God, but since you are a hidden God who cannot be seen, since no person can see you and live, I will make an image or a likeness that I will always have at hand, and I will worship them and bow down to them in your honor, and then I will remember you, God, as the minim say. That is why the text says, do not make them, do not make any idols, do not make any icons, and only later says, do not worship them. That the concern isn't just that someone will think that the icon is God, but he understands what Christian apologists say about icons and how they justify iconography. They say, well, of course, we aren't idol worshipers. We don't believe that the icon is a God. What we believe is that it's very difficult to have a relationship with a God whom you cannot see. And if you construct something physical and you can look at that physical thing, that helps you have a relationship. When you look at that physical thing, it helps you have a relationship with the invisible God that you actually are the one who worships. And Bechor Shor is forcefully arguing here that the 10 Commandments are written in this way to say that the Christian approach here is not the correct approach. It is not the approach that the Torah approves of. And relating to this week's Torah portion, where we find the story of the golden calf, when Bechor Shor gets to the story of the golden calf, you can see that he is directly and openly indulging in polemics with the Christians. he writes here in the towards the beginning of his commentary on the golden calf. The nations of the world mock us for making the golden calf. They mock us for one calf that our forefathers made when they make never-ending piles of idols every day. There's these icon factories that are producing icons every day, and they're making fun of us for once upon a time making a golden calf. He knows that, and he knows correctly, that the Christians are making fun of the Jews for making the golden calf. I don't know if he had ever read the Epistle of Barnabas, but he's, in some way he has acquired knowledge about the Christian claim that can go back already to the 1st or the 2nd century in these work by Barnabas from the church fathers. They lost it in this way forever, the Christians say. When Moses had just received it, they lost it by turning unto idols. For thus saith the Lord, Moses, Moses, come down quickly, for your people whom you brought out of the land of Egypt have done unlawfully. And Moses understood, and he threw the two tablets from his hands. He shattered the tablets, and their covenant was broken in pieces, that the covenant of the beloved Jesus might be sealed into our hearts. And so Bechor Shor is acquainted with this Christian argument that the golden calf was the incident that meant that the Jews stopped being, in essence, the chosen people of God, and that then the world had to wait for Jesus to come to actually be redeemed. And Bechor Shor says, if you think there's a problem in making one golden calf, what are you going to do with all these icons that the Christians are making on a daily basis here in France? And so that they can't be attacking us for iconography when they are so heavily into iconography. In the continuation of that passage, remember again in the continuation of this week's Parsha, that after Moses comes down there and punishes the wrongdoers, he burns down the golden calf into dust, and he puts the dust into water, and he makes the people drink this water that is a mixture of water and the dust of the golden calf. Bechor Shor writes about this: to refute the minim who make fun of the Israelites drinking the water containing the ashes of the burnt golden calf. Tell them that here the Torah teaches us through a hint that any god that can be eaten or drunk is not a god. Yet they, the Christians, eat the flesh of their false god, and they drink his blood every year. That on Easter there is the Eucharist ceremony, and so if they want to make fun of us, then we should make fun of their religion too. So continuing on this kind of aggressive kind of polemical theme of Bechor Shor. For comparison, look what Rashbam does with the golden calf. I'll just read this in English to save time. Were they so foolish as to think that this calf that was just made that very day was the one that took them out of Egypt? Rather, one must understand that all idolaters know that it is our God in heaven who created the world. But their error was as follows: Teraphim have an impure spirit in them, just as prophets have a Holy Spirit in them. When the calf spoke to them using impure spirits, the Israelites felt that it was speaking through the divine Holy Spirit. That is why they said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt." God put the impure spirits of sorcery into the calf in order to test the Israelites. Although Rashbam is a big fan of Pshat, the simple interpretation of the biblical text, he was not precisely a rationalist, and he did believe that there were forces of evil out there, and that forces of evil had kind of taken over the golden calf, and the Jews were misled by the forces of evil. They saw miracles done by God, but they saw something miraculous coming from the golden calf, and that's why they were misled. So note two things about this comment of Rashbam. First of all, it's not on any level relating to what the Christians said. And second of all, he's actually saying something very nice theologically about the non-Jews, including the Christians. All idolaters know that it is our God in heaven who created the world. Some of you who are Talmud students might know that that Rashbam's brother, Rabbi Tam, says this in a couple of comments of his in the Tosfot, that the Christians, that they might swear by the saints, or they might swear by something or other, but they're thinking about heaven when they do this. They're thinking about God. And Rashbam is saying the same thing. Yes, it's not that the idolaters don't believe in God. They all believe that there is a God in heaven, and that God is the one who created the world. The idolatry is an error. It's the error of fetishism or something like that. The error of wanting to have something concrete that one sees as having a certain holiness or status to it, but it isn't necessarily a belief in more than one God. So here we have Bechor Shor on the golden calf going on an insulting comment about the Christians. We have Rashbam, who's not taking on the Christians, even though we saw a couple of weeks ago, we saw the extent that Rashbam is interested in refuting Christianity here, but he's just explaining how is it possible that the Jews made an error of this nature? He's saying it's a natural error that people sometimes make. When they see something that looks miraculous, then they think that there might be something godly about it. And along the way, he's giving a kind of positive statement about the theology of those people who are not Jewish, including the Christians. And for a comparison on the other side, after Bechor Shor, moving on now just a little bit more in history to a book called The Nitzachon Yashan, which was edited by my teacher, Professor David Berger. It's a book that goes through, it's not a commentary on the Torah in the same way that Rashi wrote a commentary on the Torah, or Rashbam wrote a commentary on the Torah, or Yosef Bechor Shor wrote a commentary on the Torah. It's just a primer that goes through the Torah from the first verse in Bereshit to the end of Devarim and into the books of the prophets, and goes through verse by verse, talking about what the Christians say about these verses and refuting what the Christians said about about these verses. So here, fasten your seatbelts, and it's not my language. It's we don't know the name of the author of this book. We assume the scholarship says that he was a Jew who lived in Germany at the end of the 13th or the beginning of the 14th century. And in his commentary here on the Golden Calf, he quotes Rabbi Nathan Official, who lived in 13th century France. The title Official was given to people in France who worked sometimes for the clergy, and we actually know that the Official family, the Jewish Official family, were bankers or something like this for the clergy. So they had this kind of business type of relationship with the clergy, and we have some of the writings of Nathan Official, but this argument here doesn't appear anywhere except in the quotation here in Nitzachon Yashan. Rabbi Nathan Official answered the priests who asked them, "Why did you make the golden calf?" He replied, again, look at the strength of the language here. "Accursed are you blind men who have eyes and do not see, how you will be judged and entrapped in hell." Did he really say this to the archbishop that he was working for? It's so hard to believe. why an a fortiori, a kal v'chomer argument, an a fortiori argument applies here. They erred in worshiping a clean thing like gold, and they were punished. Certainly then you Christians who err in saying that something holy entered into that stinking place in a woman that serves as a receptacle for a man's semen, that you think that God entered into a woman in that way, you will certainly be consumed by fire and descend to deepest hell. In today's session, I have not gathered for you insulting Christian texts about Jews. There are many, and there are many more such insulting medieval Christian texts about Jews than insulting Jewish texts about Christianity. But I think that this is a really interesting phenomenon, and Professor Berger discusses this in his introduction to his edition of Nitzachon Yashan, this phenomenon of aggressive, nasty, offensive Jewish comments about Christians when they're living as a minority in Christian countries. It's really interesting to see the willingness to write things of this nature. Again, in a book that doesn't have a signature on it. We don't know who actually wrote the Nitzachon Yashan. But it was somebody who knew an awful lot about Christianity. I think that I'm going to skip this just for time purposes and just move on. If we have time, we'll get back to what I skipped about allegory. Nitzachon Yashan, you'll pardon my laziness here. There is not an electronic copy of Nitzachon Yashan in Hebrew or in English, and the only way that these texts show up here on my slides is by me typing them out, and so I typed this out in English. I didn't bother typing it out in Hebrew. If anybody wants to see the Hebrew of this passage, send me an email and I'll photocopy the page from Professor Berger's edition. I can send it to them. So Nitzachon Yashan, again, is going on the attack about Christianity. This is how I confute the heretics and priests who assert that they refrain from being fruitful and multiplying. They say, "Thus says the Lord to the eunuchs, I will give in my house and within my walls a place and a name better than sons and daughters." Many of you will recognize this verse is the source of the name Yad Vashem, a place and a name, Yad Vashem, for that if you don't have any children, you should know that God gives you a name and a place that are even better than having sons and daughters. And the priests who are celibate, they say that Isaiah is talking about them, that they have taken upon themselves celibacy, and God is promising them great reward for celibacy. So Nitzachon Yashan knows that this is a verse that is cited to prove that celibacy is a good idea. And here is the really strong-worded comment that he has about Christian celibacy. Tell them, foolish and weak-minded men, what do eunuchs have to do with priests? The latter, priests, have testicles. And even if they do not engage in reproduction legally and publicly, they didn't actually make themselves eunuchs. They didn't turn themselves into sarisim. They still have their full sexual organs. Even if they do not engage in reproduction legally and publicly, they wallow in licentiousness in secret. They even burn their sons and daughters in fire to their gods. Burning refers to the priests and the nuns who burn up in their lustful desire but are unable to consummate it. This is the sort of burning which is an abhorrent act that the Lord detests. Moreover, it is written in their own book of errors that Paul said it's better to marry than to burn. And what are these people doing? These priests and nuns who have taken on a life of celibacy, they're burning with sexual desire and they're indulging in illicit sexuality. I learned from Professor Berger when we studied these passages so many years ago when I was a student of his, that a lot of Jews were troubled by the fact that the kind of Mesiras Nefesh that one saw among Christian clergy who dedicated themselves to celibacy. This was seen as an act of great sacrifice, and there's something impressive about someone who manages to live, who has sexual urges and manages to live a celibate life. And a common Jewish argument is they're actually not being celibate. And sadly, we know from all sorts of scandals in the Catholic Church in recent years, a lot of people who have taken vows of celibacy certainly are not celibate. How widespread is this lack of celibacy among those who have declared themselves celibate? It's very hard to know, but Nitzachon Yashan is making the argument that either they're burning up, which they're not supposed to be doing, or they're indulging in illicit sexuality. And he has another passage about this same thing. It was because of the fact that they wallow in fornication, and yet their Torah forbids them from marrying, that they agreed to require men to come and tell their sin and publicize their adultery, so that they, the priests, might know which women were having extramarital affairs. This is Nitzachon Yashan's theory about why the priests have this thing called the confessional, because they want to know which women are indulging in extramarital affairs. They then tell those women that they would like to do the same. The priests wish to know which are the women who are easy, if you'll pardon the phrase. They're collecting this information, and the women cannot deny anything since the adulterer has already identified them. This is certainly the explanation. He's certain that this is the reason why the Christians have confessional, to help the priests find out which women are indulging in illicit sexuality. This is certainly the explanation, because otherwise, why doesn't the Pope, here we have a little proto-feminism showing up in the Nitzachon Yashan. Why doesn't the Pope, who is regarded as the vicar of their God and has the power to forbid and permit, why doesn't he give nuns the authority to hear the confession of women? It would clearly be more proper and acceptable for women to confess to women and for men to confess to men, so that they should not be seduced into fornication and adultery. But all these women who are indulging in illicit sexuality, they're going and they're telling the male priest about this. And so this, again, we see really strong attacks on the Christians here in this collection of interpretations of biblical texts that constitutes the Nitzachon Yashan. So Professor Berger discusses in his book the question of, did this really go on? And a number of scholars who have written on the issue said that clearly these are, downtrodden Jews writing things in their own works that are only going to be read by other Jews, and that they would never actually say these things openly to a Christian. And Professor Berger says in his introduction to the Nitzachon Yashan, well, he's not convinced that that is the case. And he thinks that it is distinctly possible that Jews were, from time to time, not always, they were speaking very strongly to Christians. And here's one proof that he brings, is from within this book called the Nitzachon Yashan. The author writes, Hadei shakud lomod Torah masha tashiv la'apikores v'lish'ol lahem. Be diligent in the study of Torah in order to be able to answer a heretic and to question the heretics too. You have to know if they come to you how to answer their claims and what kind of questions you should be asking of them. When you speak to them, do not allow your antagonist to change the subject, for it is the usual method of the assertive and impatient Gentile to skip from one subject to another. When he realizes his inability to verify his statements, he begins to discuss other matters. One who argues with them should be strong-willed by asking questions or giving responses that deal with the specific issue at hand and not permitting his antagonists to extricate himself from the issue until it has been completed. Don't let the Christian off the hook when you get into a discussion with him. Press your point. So at least we have one medieval Jewish author who is encouraging Jews to be very strong in their refutation of Christianity and in their arguments against Christianity. And then he concludes with a little poem there. I set it up as a poem in the Hebrew side, Vaz timtza tagoy bosh bechafer yimtza beikar kofer v'chol Yisrael yitnu imre shefer. Then you will find the Gentile thoroughly embarrassed. Indeed, he will be found to have denied their central dogmas. He'll be showing that he isn't consistent. I am writing this book in order for you to be able to prove to a Christian that the Christians are not being consistent with their own Christian dogma, while all of Israel will speak lovely words. Okay, so as I'm sure you know, this is the second last of our sessions, and I wanted the second last of our sessions to deal with aggressive Jewish polemics against Christianity, because next week we're going to be looking about the issue of, is it possible that at any point in medieval times, Jews and Christians were talking about the Bible in a non-polemical kind of way? And I will be trying to prove next week that actually that was going on from time to time in the medieval world. The Jews and the Christians were talking about the Bible in a non-polemical way, and just I thought it'd be much nicer to finish with that and to have the second last session about this collection of aggressive polemical comments that come from Jewish writers, particularly of Bible commentaries in the Middle Ages. Okay, I'm now going to take a look at the chat and see if there are any questions. Who is he writing for, and who is the audience? That's a great question. So the simple answer, of course, anything being written in medieval Hebrew is being written for a Jewish audience, and it's being written for a Jewish audience of people who live in a Christian country and who are presumably being subjected to preaching from the Christians and trying to help them deal with the pressure that's being put on them by the Christians. Mary is a version of the name Miriam, 100%. 89 BCE doesn't fit the timetable, Zev writes. That's right, it doesn't fit the timeline of Yanai HaMelech all that well, nor does it fit the timeline of Jesus. So whatever, that version of Toldot Yeshu did not have the best understanding of the history. Toldot Yeshu's story is gratuitous. I would agree with you totally, Robert. Jesus' birth from illicit sexuality, isn't all this in the uncensored Gemara? LMS, yes, the answer is it is there, but it's written in Toldot Yeshu, it's written in much more detailed. Mal'igim is a clever wordplay on Egel. Very nice. Gershon, our resident word player, points out that in his comment about the Egel, Bechor Shor says that the Christians are Mal'igim, which sounds like the word Egel. Very nice. Would the Christians in France have written their NT by this time in French or in Greek and Latin? In which case did Bechor Shor know classical languages? no, they certainly were not writing their New Testament in French at this time. It was being studied in Greek and in Latin. What did Bechor Shor read Latin? You know, I think I told you when we did Rashbam that I actually think that it's unlikely that Rashbam read Latin. But when I look at Yosef Bechor Shor, either he read Latin or he just talked an awful lot with Christians, and he knew from his discussions with Christians what it says there. But he seems to have a much greater acquaintance with these Christian texts. Perhaps put sources you cite into context with public, yes, of course. The disputes were around public disputations. B suggests that it's important to point out, and I agree, it is important to point out the pressure that was being put on Jews in those days. There's an article written by the historian Amos Funkenstein that argues that in the second half of the 12th century and in the 13th century, there was a true deterioration of the relationship between Jews and Christians in the countries where Jews lived, in France and Germany. And so they can see this passion coming out of the Jews because of the difficulty. Please, could I have your email details? Lockshin, my last name, Lockshin, at YorkU, YORKU, standing for York University, YORKU.ca, standing for Canada. Why would Bechor Shor be put into a contemporary edition? It will just cause more anti-Semitism, Adina asked. A great question. You know, Adina, I wonder about teaching these texts, and these. It is part of Jewish history. These texts, but Torah in Motion classes are open for anybody who wants to register for them. So I often wonder about the. I decided that it does show some insight into the way in which Jews were relating to Christians and relating to the Bible and relating to the way that the Christians are relating to the Bible. But as I said before, Adina, for that reason, I decided that I'm going to end with something nicer next week than what we were looking at today. Okay. If anybody wants to unmute themselves and ask something or comment on anything, please feel free.
I have a comment, Marty.
Please.
I think of driving through Quebec in the old days, and there was a monastery, an orphanage attached to just about every convent. And you wondered where those orphans came from. And as I got older, I figured it out. But and how abused they must have been. When I think of there was a whole period of tablecloths that were sold around the country, done by the orphans in Quebec, the embroidery, and it came from those places. You know, it took a while for us to put it together because we were children for a while. Anyway, that's it.
Interesting insight. Thank you, Pearlie.
Professor
Go ahead,
Lockshin,
Adina. Yes, go ahead, Adina.
Oh, sorry, somebody else. Sorry.
It's not that I didn't understand why you're teaching it. What I don't understand is why they're putting it into the new edition of, what did you say, Mikrot Gedolot?
That's right. This is the best edition of Mikrot Gedolot that exists now. It's published by Bar-Ilan University. It's the most using the best manuscripts of all the commentaries, and suddenly Rabbi Yosef Bechor Shor's commentary has been for the first time promoted to.
Why would they do that?
Yes. Okay. So, for those of you for whom this is your first introduction to Rabbi Yosef Bechor Shor, I would say that comments that have to do with Christianity probably constitute less than 1% of his commentary on the Torah. I've drawn out all the comments that have to do with Christianity, but I guess the editors from Bar Ilan University who put this together think that Bechor Shor had a lot of insights into the Torah and want those insights to be available to people in an edition that is that's a scholarly edition based on the best manuscripts. But it comes with it comes with these nasty passages. Yes, I once talked with Professor Berger about how he felt about publishing a translation of the Nitzachon Yashan. Professor Berger is also someone who was concerned about anti-Semitism, and you know, he's putting these texts out into the public in an English translation. I think this was the first translation ever. One of the sources that Professor Berger used when he had a few manuscripts of the Nitzachon Yashan, and one of the sources was a book written by an early modern Christian called Wagenseil. I forget what Wagenseil's first name was. Wagenseil wrote a book called Tela Ignea Satanae, a Latin name which means the fiery arrows of the devil. The devil, that's us, that's the Jews. And Wagenseil went and collected a bunch of anti-Christian Jewish texts and published them in order to try to prove how nasty the Jews are. And you know, Wagenseil was perhaps, I think it might be fair to say, trying to promote anti-Semitism by making a Latin translation of the Nitzachon Yashan available to late medieval, early modern readers. And so, you know, this is a question that that scholars have to consider. The common theory of scholarship is that, you know, it's scholarship for scholarship's sake, and you know, it's knowledge you have to know in order to understand that period. You have to be acquainted with all the texts. Adina, I hear you. I think that all of the questions that you're raising here are very good questions.
Can I say something,
please?
And I'm from England. I'm going to have to ask your friend Jonathan Milewski for your details. I've been involved with dialogue with the church for years, you know, since I was about 25 and I was teaching clergy. And, you know, some of them absolutely hate Jews. I mean, at the moment, we're being accused of breeding like rabbits. That's in the 21st century. I think people in Canada don't realize maybe just how anti-Jewish the church is in this country, and certainly in some parts of America. And I just want to say how brilliant I found this Parshanut and Polemics, because we've got a group with the former Archbishop of Canterbury, and we're looking at all this stuff. And, you know, I know a bit about Ibn Ezra, as you know, but I didn't know so much about Bechor Shor, and I think he's responding to what's going on. And I would like to receive the two allegorical. So I'll ask Jonathan Milewski if that's all right for your details. And I think you're brilliant. You know, it's very upsetting, but they must have been pushed beyond all. You know, they were a tiny minority in France, and Rashi also worked with the church authorities, you know, and he saw the Crusades. I think people in Canada just think everyone's very nice, but they're not, because quite honestly, some of the Christian, I know that I'm not about politics now at your university, some of Christian, they don't seem to have any sort of not dogma, they don't have to seem to have any faith without attacking Judaism at very deep level. You know, consecutive archbishops of Canterbury, and we have to say this. So I think it's very good what you're doing, and I'm glad you're in Israel, so you can't get attacked.
Well, next week, as I said, next week we will see a very different approach. And I don't think it was always bad, that it was always tense, and that is what I'm going to be trying to argue next week. So for those of you who are interested in an antidote to what we did this week, be sure to come back for the last session. Rabbi Kelman asked me to tell people that an hour from now, there's, I think, Rabbi Adler talking about Pesach, Rabbi Soloveitchik on Pesach, and you can check out many other fine programs coming up from Torah in Motion. Wonderful seeing you all, and see you next week.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.